Well, welcome everyone. Many thanks for joining our webinar today. It's the last webinar of 2024, so I'm delighted that many of you could join, and those of you who couldn't join will be watching this online. We have a very important topic today to discuss that is very much at the core of what we are doing at the International Center for EdTech Impact, in the sense that we are trying to connect the academic side and the industry side. And we are delighted that we are not the only one in the space doing this. And I'm pleased to be joined by four wonderful speakers today who will be sharing about how they are connecting academics, scholars, researchers, and the EdTech provider side. So we'll start by each of them telling us a little bit about the project that they have or the initiative that they are part of, and sharing what have been their challenges and learning lessons in approaching this ecosystem of knowledge brokering in EdTech. So I'll start with you, John, if you don't mind saying a little bit more about yourself, where you're joining from, and the initiative that you are leading.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is John Gamba. I am the entrepreneur in residence and director of innovative programs at Catalyst at Penn GSE, Penn's Graduate School of Education. I oversee all of our entrepreneurial programming, and our vision is to advance impact, innovation, and equity in worldwide education. And we do that through a continuum of programming, meetups, webinars, my entrepreneur in residence hours, and our signature program, the Milken Penn GSE Business Plan Competition, which is now in its 16th year. All of our competitors are integrated through our Catapult Virtual Accelerator, and this is a great topic for us. We really believe in research to practice and helping our EdTech entrepreneurs think about the underlying or the foundational research that's going into their logic models or their theory of action, and what the evaluative model is that they're putting into place to measure outcomes, because we know that a more outcomes-driven venture leads to more investability, sustainability, and ultimately scalability. So I'm excited to be here. Really awesome to be with my fellow guests and jump into a great conversation.
Lovely, thank you, John. And Kelly, you are very much a proponent of this terminology in terms of knowledge brokering, and you've been very leading much in the space in terms of how learning scientists are connected to the practitioner side. Do you want to say a bit more about your work?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Kelly Shiohira, and I'm joining you today from Anastasia State Park in Florida. I'm taking a brief break from a camping trip with my family to join this webinar, so apologies if you hear some things in the background. I head up the Global Science of Learning Education Network, and John, incidentally, I'm a graduate of Penn GSE, so I'm happy to see you here as well.
Awesome. Great, Kelly.
Yeah. So the Global Science of Learning Education Network is an international network of about 850 education practitioners, network leaders, scientists who focus on the science of learning, as well as learning scientists who focus on kind of applied research and practice, policymakers, philanthropists and funders, yeah, as well as some education practitioners now who have joined us as well. And the shared investment across this broad network, which covers 66 countries currently, is that everyone is at least interested, if not fully invested, in the better integration of the science of learning into education policy and practice. And so a lot of what we do as the network is to focus on the how of that. You know, we have scientists who are deeply invested in making a real life difference with their work, who have really intense knowledge about the neurological, biological, cultural anthropology, and all of the component factors that go into the processes of learning, I should say, and how we actually can leverage that more meaningfully through what we call kind of catalysts like ed tech, policy, curriculum developers, initial teacher education programs. This is really what we are focused on as essentially a knowledge brokering organization. So we've been at it for about 5 years, and we'll keep pushing into the future.
Keep on pushing. Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. And Niko, you are joining us from Finland, and the work that you've been doing in Helsinki might be known to some people, but not everyone. So if you don't mind sharing a bit more about it.
Sure. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, I guess, for people online. So my name is Niko Lindholm, and I'm the Senior Business Advisor and EdTech Innovation Lead at the Helsinki Education Hub. And the Helsinki Education Hub is currently run from the Faculty of Educational Sciences at University of Helsinki. University of Helsinki, especially the Faculty of Educational Sciences, is one of the top faculties in this area in the world and in Europe. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a complete innovation ecosystem in the EdTech vertical, meaning that we're physically located here at the faculty. We're running an innovation program within the faculty premises where we invite external EdTech startups and then university-based EdTech teams, more or less, I guess, to join the program. And during the program, we support them in really looking at the learning science bit into the product before the technology and weave them together. And then, of course, we have a product development program as part of it. So we are using some of the models that Stanford does with their Lean Launchpad. So we are copying with pride from there that part, but the learning science bit is ours totally. And the unique part with our program is that we are then able to test and validate the solutions in the public schools here in Helsinki, which are many, which means from early childhood all the way to university and everything in between, even vocational schools. So in that sense, we're trying to create this complete structure where entrepreneurs come in with their solution. We support them with understanding learning science and the product development and business development part. And then we send them in for trials, tests, pilots, whatever you want to call them in the public schools here. And through that process, we support not only the entrepreneurs, but also the public education system in proper digitalization of education with learning science-based solutions. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Niko. And last but definitely not least, Janika, we know each other through the EdTech Talents project. You want to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm Janika Leoste. I'm a scientist or associate professor both of educational robotics and also in IT didactics. But talking about this knowledge brokerage, it means that I also work as a principal investigator of one Horizon Europe 3 million project called ERA Talents. And yeah, maybe our perspective is a bit different because we are talking about talents, and now there is a question, who are the talents or talents to be? And in our project methodology, we foresee that educational and digital technologies scientists could be these talents who could take their knowledge and spread or transfer it to society. It means to the companies, to policymakers, but for that they need kind of, how to say, start or understanding. They have to go through this butterfly transformation because if you know a typical scientist doesn't care much of selling his or her knowledge, rather presenting the knowledge in a scientific way. And how we do this butterfly transformation, if I can say so, the project methodology foresees that scientists from advancing countries like Estonia, Hungary, and Serbia, and maybe also in the future from other countries, will travel cross-border and cross-institutional to be like a work shadows or successful spin-off companies or edtechs to get their idea how to package their knowledge so it would be useful whether for university institutional change to be more edtech friendly, or whether they would like to start their own spin-off, or maybe they can just design or create the knowledge services that the universities could offer to the society. So that's shortly what we are doing right now. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for setting the scene and sort of painting the picture of the individual models that you have in your respective organizations. I wonder whether we could talk a little bit more about the challenges that you have encountered with the model that you are following. So we obviously all want to ensure that the knowledge travels, that it gets into practice, and that we involve the sort of golden triangle of practitioners, researchers, and developers into it. What have been the key challenges for you? What would you say that has worked less well with the model that you've been developing and refining over the years? John, would you mind starting?
One of the first words that come to mind on challenges would be the word patience. I think there's a tension sometimes between ed tech and ventures and entrepreneurship with the patience that's required to bring a product out into the market, sufficiently test it, pressure test the evaluative model, and determine what needs to happen co-creation or co-construction wise before it's ready for full commercialization. We have investors who are revenue, revenue, revenue. And we've got the world of research and impact that's saying, hey, we need a little bit of patience to determine what needs to happen before this thing is fully baked. So some of the challenges through our virtual accelerator Catapult, which connects entrepreneurs to learning resources, strategic advisors, academic researchers, and classroom practitioners in this community of entrepreneurial practice, we stress there needs to be patience. We only integrate or bring in financial advisors and financial partners who understand, especially in this age of AI and machine learning, that we need to be patient as we co-construct these applications and bring them to market for long-term sustainable growth.
Love that. Yeah. I think that's been one of the key challenges we have seen as well. And I wonder, Niko, whether you want to come in as next in terms of the EU model being a bit different when it comes to VC funding and the push for scale. How do you see that from your perspective?
Well, I've been doing this for 15 years now, and we have been trying to create this kind of system that we have in place now at University of Helsinki through the Helsinki Education Hub. And of course, there have been many, many different challenges, but I would like to more or less elevate the idea of complexity when it comes to education technology. So education technology for different kinds of people means different things. Entrepreneurs are creating a solution and they want to go straight forward to get the money and scale. Then you have school teachers who want to understand if there's an actual impact with the solution. Then you have learners using them, trying to find out if this is good for me or not. And then you have the research aspect, which is then long-term, takes time. You need funding to actually create the research paper and then collect the data and maybe even then publish it and all that stuff. So I think the biggest challenge for us is that we have a very complex structure, which we are trying to simplify for all of these different stakeholders and at the same time serve them at the same point. So how do we communicate this? And then you have the investors too. How do we communicate all of that? So it's a bit tough from that side. But especially as we are now in a new stage where we are physically at the Faculty of Educational Science. So I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing is how do we onboard the researchers to the clock speed of entrepreneurs, and then how do we combine their work at the same time. So we haven't really figured that out yet, but it needs to be done. Everyone has to give so that they can receive in a way. Thanks.
Yeah, well put. Thank you. Janika, I saw you nodding, so I suppose you encountered similar challenges. Do you want to share a bit more?
Yes, if you mean what are the real issues or problems during the journey of this transformation. So first, what is the main barrier when we try to make scientists entrepreneurs is a time limitation, because if you are a scientist, actually you have to fulfill all the scientific criteria, you would feel like 100 hours per week. And then there is something new. Okay, can you do something extra? I think that the key how to say how to invite scientists to become more entrepreneurial people is to show that actually it's just the same thing, just another side of the coin. So basically, when they realize that actually their knowledge could be applied, and also they understand that their valuable knowledge would bring something extra to this European digital agenda level, they get excited because, when we're dealing about uncertainty and future things, we just don't know how much do we know or how valuable our knowledge is. So now talking about our projects, we have set kind of really nice small KPIs or targets because one thing is professional development. So how you are going to measure this professional development. One thing is you take a survey, you do some self-assessment, and now you say, okay, this scientist is 1% entrepreneurial, and now after 2 years, he or she is 50% entrepreneurial, but it's not tangible and it's not something we can deliver to the market. So in our project, we have decided that every researcher who goes through this transformation process will be able to offer to the market some tangible service or product after a specific time frame. And okay, it doesn't have to be TRL level 9, but we have decided that it has to be at the level TRL 6. So your product and or service has to be demonstrated on the real environment or in the environment really close to that. So it means that you have to have a client. Someone needs your product or idea or service or concept. And now we have reached to another problem. Actually, as we have already finished almost this one cycle, we have this TRL 6 level products. Now the next step is, in case I would want to commercialize it, so we reach to the IP issue. So how we could convert now this IP that is produced during your work time to your potential spin-off, and different countries and universities have different regulations for that. Or we can say that maybe some universities or some countries don't have these regulations developed at all. And this is the second biggest barrier, how I can take my knowledge and put it to my future company. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in the issue of IP and really showing a model how you're encouraging researchers who might be initially reluctant to engage in this kind of work, how to motivate them with some specific structured approach. That's really interesting to hear. Kelly, you are connected to researchers across the globe, so you would have seen some of these challenges in different contexts as well. What has been the key challenge from your perspective?
It's hard to say just one, to be honest. I do think that the work that we're undertaking is extremely difficult, and this idea of research into practice takes various forms. And I'm impressed by the work and the different approaches that we've already heard today. I think when I think about the work that the network does, what we are about is really breaking down silos, creating intersectoral and cross-disciplinary teams to work on specific areas. And the reason why we do that is because of the challenges that emerge if you don't. The fact is, we know a lot. There are different ideas about how evidence is collected, what constitutes evidence, what's valued as evidence. But the reality is that whether you're coming from a more qualitative or observational approach, you're generating a type of evidence. And obviously, if you're working in a laboratory and you're doing kind of research on process and neurology, biology, physiology, you're generating important knowledge as well. And all of that knowledge really needs to be integrated if we want to make effective and useful interventions for education. And I'm not just talking about ed tech either. I mean, just generally, the education system is not necessarily as responsive as it should be to the needs of learners. If we want to know why 70% of learners are failing, we don't actually have to look very hard. We haven't set them up for success. And what we continuously try to do is to change the circumstances of learners to better fit the ideal and the assumptions that we make in designing our systems. But really there's another approach where we can take a step back and we can actually alter quite a lot, even from the physical environment onwards, to better engage learners. And so what we see over and over again, kind of in educational technology and in curriculum development, is the same story, which is that there are really well-meaning people who come into it without the range of knowledge that's necessary, or even an understanding of what the range of knowledge that would be necessary is. You know, so if you measure something like time on task, for example, like there's a point at which that actually becomes a negative, right? So if you study the science of learning and you come at it from attentional perspectives, you would understand that prolonged attention isn't necessarily a good thing, and that there's a balance of different types of inputs that are needed. And you would also think about things like interleaving or spaced repetition, and you think about things like multi-sensory inputs and the types of different inputs that are really necessary for not only learning but also memory. So, you know, you think about how tech needs to play a role in kind of a awareness system of it. And so we don't really let it happen very, and part of that is this market-driven approach. And then the other side is that the market isn't necessarily as knowledgeable as it should be, right? So are we dealing with informed consumers? Not always, and especially not in the cases of emerging technology. And that's not. And so there are very limited checks and controls on quality. We get metrics like, oh, 1 million people are using it and therefore it must be good. Or, oh, students spend 6 hours after school time on this every day and therefore it's engaging. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's translating into the types of learning that we really want to happen, or even the development of learning processes or metacognition that we really want. So to break all of that down really requires, from the onset, interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary work. What do we know from the learning sciences? What do we know from the science of learning? What do we know from the policy perspective? What do we know from the EdTech developer side and the market research side? And how do we bring all of that together? And so that's really what we focus on. We call them action collaboratives, and they focus in on specific areas. So the one that we have that's very active at the moment is focused on artificial intelligence. They're coming up with policy advice. We've run a series of webinars. Natalia is well aware. And we're just investigating, essentially, what do we know about how humans engage with technology? What do we expect could be the potential pitfalls? How can we mitigate those in advance? You know, not retrospectively like, oh, well, we tried that and it didn't work. Because the last point I need to make on this is that the stakes are high. When mistranslation happens or selective application of research can happen, and you can find evidence and justification for almost anything, but the reality is that when you selectively choose the evidence that you want to justify your policy or your product, and then you push it at scale, you can disadvantage a lot of learners. And the example that I often point to is the language policy in Africa. I spent 12 years working in Africa, and the majority of countries there have a home language policy that comes up to grade 3. And then they switch to a dominant language, English, French, Afrikaans, whatever it might be. And we see this huge drop-off in performance. It's because policy was to learning in home language. You won't be proficient enough to read an academic textbook in grade 4 in a second language, even if you study that second language from grade 1, if it's not a full immersion environment. And so as a result, we have 2 generations lost, you know, in Africa of learners who have failed. So this is not all of them have failed. That's an overstatement, but a lot of them have. And I think it could have been avoided with a more concentrated push towards home language learning throughout, all the way up to grade 12. If you want grade 9 to be the graduation rate, you must teach them in their language. But this is just an example when we talk about challenges of the things that can happen in the approach that we're trying to take to mitigate some of the really profound impacts that we can have if we're not careful.
Very, very proud that Kelly
Yeah.
graduated from the Penn's Graduate School of Education. And Niko mentioned that some of the work that he's doing was informed by some university, Stanford, I think he said. I haven't heard of that university, but I am very I'm struck by some of Kelly's comments because she chose a region of the world to kind of, I would say, have some consternation about how the research informed policy, how policy has informed research, and what that means to end users and students and learning. But I think you could make that same case for the United States. I mean, if you look at 70% of our students can't read at grade level, and you look at the science of reading, and you look at Emily Hanford's work and some of the things that came out post-pandemic, you'd start seeing this tension between what research was really employed and enacted and commercialized. And I have to be careful because a lot of our funding comes from publishers, and I think they're all well-meaning. But I think that that is exactly the point that we should all make in terms of having patience. And I think it's a process of demystification, demystifying the research that for the science of learning for entrepreneurs, and demystifying what the entrepreneurial process, problem, solution, TAM, SAM, SOM, go-to-market strategies, beachhead, co-construction, co-creation, and what that all means for the researchers. One of the things that I'll share an anecdote, Kelly will know this well. When I was hired as the first entrepreneur in residence at Penn's Graduate School of Education, some people came to me and said, be careful. There are researchers here who are very worried about the commercialization of education. You're an entrepreneur who's trying to. And so I went on a listening tour, and I sat down with some of our researchers, and I introduced myself, talked about my career, and just listened. And what I heard, which was very interesting, was, where have you been? We want to do more to commercialize or practicalize our research instead of just publishing, to actually get out into more research practice partnerships, to get out into research with consequence, which our new dean, Catherine Strunk, likes to talk about. But it can't happen mealy-mouthed, and it can't happen without intentionality, and it can't happen without being really, really committed and intentional about what the research says, how the research can inform design, and how you iterate. We're big on agile, and how we iterate in design sprints to make sure that what is actually being created is based on best practices in research.
Yeah, you both make such important points, and I think that is one of the difficulties that we have been facing, that even if you create these networks and, bring in researchers from various disciplines, sometimes the translation to practice gets limited because there isn't the tradition of working with researchers in this sort of iterative, deeper way. That if there are some publishers and companies that do involve researchers in their process, it tends to be paying lip service to this sort of profound process that needs to happen in research. And that puts many researchers off, right? They don't want to be the sort of quick advisory board meeting and then their name is suddenly associated with a product. So how do we make sure that we have this shared understanding of what research means? How do we honor the iterative nature of research with these founders who are very much pushed by the business agenda, right? So this sort of misalignment of values and incentives in the system is an ongoing issue, and there are no quick fixes for it. But at least having these networks so it can be discussed is very important. Niko, do you want to say a bit more about your work in this space?
No, I completely agree what was just mentioned by Kelly and John. And we have only started the whole process here at the Faculty of Educational Sciences at the University of Helsinki now. So it was actually very nice to hear what John said about the listening part. So that's something that we would be need to doing with our own researchers here at the faculty. From our side, I think what we're trying to do is not do deep tech ed tech in a way, where the solutions are completely immersed in some kind of research paper or multiple research papers. But I think from our side, we try to transfer bits and pieces of research to the entrepreneurs. So the demystifying that John mentioned here is something that we're trying to do in the beginning. Because now that we have started this work at the Faculty of Educational Sciences, we do understand that we can bring all kinds of different engineering processes into the frame and introduce them to the faculty and the researchers here. But in the end, it's going to need a culture shift. And that takes years. And we need to take it slowly. We need to build up the connections between us who operate the hub, but then also the researchers and then the entrepreneurs. And how do we do that? So it's through culture change. So in Finland, we have been trying to create these kind of innovation system for multiple years now already, but it has been something of a bit of a struggle because of the lack of language, lack of joint culture, and because of that, the incapacity, more or less, of to work together. So we need to take it slow and make everyone understand each other and how to get closer in a way. And I think that that's done by, of course, lots of communication, but also through examples. So if we can now, for example, through our incubation program, show that we have these solutions that are coming in already as research-based or research-informed, and then we strengthen them here, and then we more or less open up what these teams are then developing to the researchers, and then through that process are able to invite them in because of their interest towards the solution. So then that slowly starts to build up the culture of cooperation between the different clock speeds of entrepreneurs and researchers. And I don't think that an incubation program is a 3-month, 4-month, 5-month incubation program is enough. So it needs to be a long-term connection between the faculty and these entrepreneurs who then graduate from our program so that they can always come back when needed for their purpose as entrepreneurs. But at the same time, the researchers are always able to go back to the entrepreneurs if they need some data for research, for example. So it needs to be a win-win situation for both.
That's right. Like, how do you align the benefits for the different sides? Yeah. And one of the beauties of hosting at a university is that you do have the possibility of building on graduate programs and sort of ensuring that it continues. I wonder whether that is something that you have embedded in your process, Janika, in terms of the longevity of the program when it finishes, when the EU funding is over, what will happen then?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. First, I would like to mention that in our EdTech Talents project, Tallinn University, as one of the 2 teacher training universities in Estonia, has partnership with EdTech Estonia, who is umbrella organization for 80, not 18, but 80 Estonian EdTech startups. So I think that's a good start. Because there is a saying that you can't be polite when you are alone, and also you can't expect to do any major changes in EdTech ecosystem if you don't collaborate with EdTechs. And I think it's somewhat similar in Finland, that it is not so easy to EdTech company to penetrate the school or kindergarten with their product. So actually, it's somewhat expected that there is some, how to say, uh, suggestion or validation by a lecturer institute I also happen to be. So it is my opportunity to showcase these new innovations to my students. For example, one of my favorite subjects I give in the fall is 6-credit course, integrating robotics and STEAM kits into early childhood and primary education. And you see, it's a quite formal one, but how we conduct it is that we have a lab at our university. So when we as a university want to do something in the field, so first we have to have the lab where we can find all these edtech technologies used in your country, but also it means that I have to have collaboration with these edtechs. And for me, maybe the biggest question, and it is also the really serious ethical question for all researchers is, okay, it would be great to collaborate in a sense that I invite these edtech companies to my classes to introduce their services because my students happen to be already working teachers. But what happens every time they start selling their products? And if you invite one, you have to invite 79 others. So as Niko mentioned, this is like a bit different culture. At university, we introduce, we don't sell. But if you invite a business person always starts this selling process, and sometimes they might mess up. Okay, I went to university, it's already validation. What we have done in Estonia, we support this natural collaboration and transformation through ETH hackathons. We just finished one. I was the PI of that, where we bring all the ecosystem together, dedicated ETH hackathons. And another thing, what the Estonian universities do with ETH Estonia, we conduct co-creation projects. It's like pre-incubation where we also include teachers. So these are things we do. So we try to bring everything in our projects and programs, but at university we have to distinguish this thin line that whether you introduce the product to me or whether you try to sell it to my students. So that's the story. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And it's the tension in local innovation always, isn't it? That on one hand, we do want to support local innovators. On the other hand, it does become tricky with the commercial side for researchers. And that is very much linked to test beds and the models that many test beds have been promoting in the space in terms of involving teachers testing the products together with developers, sometimes with and sometimes without researchers' input. I know, Niko, that you have done a lot of space in that testbed area, a lot of work in that testbed space. Do you want to say a bit more about how you see it with your current position and where testbeds come into it in terms of how teachers can benefit?
Yeah, so we have something called Helsinki EdTech Testbed Environment, which is the city publicly run city schools and early childhood education units and all that, and the vocational schools and all that. So, and it's been up and running now for a few years. And as far as I know, it's the only systemic, sustainable EdTech testbed in the world currently. And it has a purpose of course, supporting the division of education at City of Helsinki in understanding what kind of solutions there are out there. But it has also an innovation angle to it. So it's a way for us to support new entrepreneurs in developing their solutions, co-innovate, co-create, co-develop, depending on the solution and the entrepreneur. But I think the most important thing why it was established was that we have always had in the past this Great Wall of Finland, not China, but Great Wall of Finland. And the biggest wall of Finland is the one between edtech entrepreneurs and the public schools. And develop that based on their gut feeling. And we, of course, could see that that doesn't work. And I was running accelerator programs before when my job was more or less on the commercial side. So then we started to design these processes that, hey, we need to more or less connect the users, meaning educators and learners, with the entrepreneurs in order to at least give a first glimpse of needs from the public education system to the entrepreneurs so that they start to create solutions that are actually needed. And because of that, the whole testbed environment was more or less created. And it has been very good when it comes to Finnish edtech that we have it in place, because now we can see that the edtech companies stemming from this country are usually, let's say 90% of them, are co-developed, co-innovated, co-created with educators and learners. So we can see that even if they are not affiliated or directly connected to the Faculty of Educational Sciences at University of Helsinki, at least they have been in that process of developing the solution together with educators and learners in the public schools, which means that they are then at the same time supporting the schools in looking what kind of solutions there are out there. But on top of that, they are strengthening the learning science bit on practitioner level in the solution, which supports them as they grow as entrepreneurs and companies. But as I said earlier, so we have had these different bits and pieces in the innovation ecosystem in action before. So we have had the testbed environment, we have had the EdTech accelerators and all that. But finally, I think after 15 years, we can say that we have the innovation ecosystem as a complete system, because now the university is involved, and we have the testbed, and we have the innovation program, and even access to accelerators and VC funding and all that stuff. But the testbed environment that we have built here is crucial for the development of so-called meaningful, proper pedagogical solutions, at least coming from Finland.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Niko. We have some exciting questions in the chat. So in the interest of time, if I could ask John to answer the first question from Phil about ethics. I wonder whether you could speak to issues around student data privacy and other ethical issues from what you have seen.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hey, Phil, I know Phil, and we've had some great conversations on research to practice and this subject as it relates to AI and machine learning and the ethical considerations. I think we talk a lot about the promises and perils of AI, and we have to think about the ethical considerations of how data is protected, how data is used. And I think it has to just go in the conversation as much as we think about the promise of AI as it relates to personalization and as it relates to how it can promulgate good learning. We also really have to be conscious of data privacy policies and data protection of our student data in that ilk. I think that most school districts now are adopting AI policies that incorporate ethical considerations with regard to how data is used. But I think we're still very early in that process. And I'm wondering how Kelly, Niko, and Janika would also respond to that question.
Kelly, you want to go next?
Sure, I'm happy to go. So I think in terms of ethics, how you deal with things like student data privacy, there are ways and means. I think policymakers need to urgently review these sorts of policies, ideally from an informed perspective, because quite a lot of our student protections were written far before the introduction of AI, and the world has changed in pretty significant ways that we really do need to catch up to. But I would actually like to talk to a different data ethics concern, which is how we treat data, how we utilize data, and how well we remember that these data points are actually children, right? Or students or people. You know, when you remove outliers, you're removing children. When you make assumptions and you use it to predict performance, is that fair? Like, the whole point of education is that we can break cycles, we can overcome the expectations. And it's my personal life journey has been that public education enabled me to go to UPenn, to graduate, to be where I am today. And if you had looked at me on a trend line in terms of family income, in terms of where I lived, in terms of really anything, I shouldn't be here. I get asked all the time how this happened. And that's the reality of what we hope for education, right? So when we act as researchers, when we put together our statistics, when we measure a 0.2 standard deviation change and call it success, what does that actually mean for the kids on the ground? Because I have seen so many research projects declare something successful on the basis of a standard deviation change, when really all it means in practice is that the students know 5 or 10 more letters than they knew before. And what is that? What is that? What does that mean for their future, for their reality, for their ability to read, if that's the goal of the program? And what does it mean against the money you spent, And so I would urge us to think about data ethics inclusively. Yes, privacy is super important, but also what is data? What are numbers? How do we present them? And what do they mean actually retranslated into the real life scenarios of the children or the adults, for those who are concerned with higher education, that we're actually working with? And that's the gap that I've seen, I would say, far more often even than the privacy concern, which is increasingly being addressed. Differential privacy, anonymization, just like very simple factors like that have been deployed, I think, to pretty good effect. That's my comment there. Thanks.
I just want to respond to Kelly too, really quickly on that. I think the important point here is transparency. I think sometimes we get caught up in how we're going to use the data. It's either going to be used poorly or going to be used ethically. And I think that if we are, for instance, a company that has using large language models to help pre-K students read, that if we're telling parents who might be of a certain socioeconomic level or a certain demographic or a certain ethnographic, if we're saying to them certain dialects or certain ways that language is going to come into our systems can be used to determine how AI can help in a student-centered way, we want to use this data. It is going to be ethical. Can we? And encourage someone like parents to say, yeah, we're trying to prevent hallucinations, and we're trying to prevent ethical issues and I would say diversity and equity issues with regard to how these technologies are used. And if you're transparent to say, hey, if certain voice recognition prompts come in and they're going to be analyzed in this way, let's not be afraid of that. Let's use that so we can improve. So I think the transparency, the communication needs to be there. And I think we can flip potential problems into opportunities to help the students that are most underrepresented.
Thank you so much, both of you, for elevating these points. I mean, it couldn't be really emphasized more how important it is that we do not innovate only for 5%, but that we are really innovating for all children and make sure that we have this equity agenda embedded in our models. It's a nice segue to one of the questions in the chat. I see that this is an important topic for many of us in terms of how do we ensure that when we support local innovation and develop technologies that are responsive to what teachers are saying they need right now, how do we how can we then scale them? How can we make sure that they are also working in other contexts? Have you seen any good practice around it? I don't know who can start answering that question first. Go ahead, Niko.
Well, I mean, our incubation program is currently graduate group that has been developed here, tried and tested in the Finnish education system, but then transferred into less developed education system in Global South, for example. And the reason for that is that they are actually research-based. And along the way, as they have been developing the solution further, they have always included research as something, as part of the development process. And wherever they go, they always do research in that local market in order to understand what is going on in that local market and how the solution should be maybe adapted into that local context. But of course, you have then sometimes you have very local needs, and some edtech entrepreneurs are responding to that. It's their choice. They can do that if they want. And it's fine. But I think that entrepreneurs in general, if they want to scale from a business point of view, then they should have this understanding, at least here in Finland, what's outside of Finland and what does it mean to go outside of Finland. The Finnish education system is very different from the different education systems in plural that exist in Germany. The Finnish education system is very different compared to the Vietnamese one, or even the Singaporean, of course. So I think it's the responsibility of the entrepreneurs at the same time. So it's not something that we can just tell them to do, but they need to be smart in doing so. But I just want to come back to the thing that I started with, and that was that the most successful Finnish edtech companies' solutions are the ones that are research-based, and because of that, they have been able to scale in less developed systems as well.
Can I come in quickly, Natalia?
Please.
I just want to say I've had the privilege to work with a couple of Finnish edtech companies in Africa over the course of my career, and they are very effective. But I just want to emphasize that when we say research-based, it's not contextual research necessarily that makes the difference. When something is research-based or evidence-based and it's designed with the needs of learners,
Just when she was getting into it. Oh man.
Yeah, I think it was with the needs of the learners. Well, before she comes back, is there something more you wanted to say to this point, Janika?
I was wondering that edtechs are research-based, but on the other hand, when these edtech companies start their journey, they are so small that they have no money for research and innovation department, and they can't hire any educational researcher. So the thing we offer here in edtech Talents, we have created such a webinar series like Project Academy, and we invite the edtech companies to join these project academies, and we explain them there how to write these horizontal level or national level joint projects with researchers. Because if you are just on the beginning of something together with the researchers, and also there is mostly salary opportunity to develop further. And I can confirm that's the reason why we have also this EdTech Estonia on the board in all projects that are related to knowledge transfer.
Thanks, Janika.
Thank you.
Are there other points that you want to make, perhaps about also other questions in the chat, John? Are there some questions that you would want to address while I'm finding Kelly?
I don't know if I want to address, but I'm +1 on Janika and where Kelly was going. I also want to say we're playing around with an interesting concept at Penn GSE with regard to this idea of research to practice and flipping it. We're starting to think about practice to research, and we're having more and more of our researchers say, working with EdTech or working with products and service providers is giving us an opportunity to change the way that we're thinking about research. I'll give you a perfect example. There's a company called Gabon. Gabon is a company out of in New England who has provided parental engagement tools to help parents get further engaged with their child's education. They got joined with a researcher at Penn GSE named Mike Rovine, one of the foremost statisticians and evaluators in education. And he said, man, it's been such a pleasure working with them, because typically if we were in our own research capacity researching the impact of parental engagement and how students engage with parents and how that it makes them more successful, we'd have to go into the home and we'd have to do an observation. But with technology, we can see hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of interactions and be able to analyze that faster. So they're starting to think about how certain paradigms are shifting in terms of how innovations can impact the research process. So we're doing a lot of that right now. We're looking at what's working in ed tech, determining if we can benchmark what's working and kind of come up with innovation and equity indexes, but also thinking about what researchers can do to kind of flip the way that they're doing evaluations and how that's changing the landscape of education research through the lens of these research practice partnerships. Some exciting work that we're doing at Penn GSE.
Oh, very exciting. Yes. Kelly, you are back. Do you want to finish your point you were making before you got cut off?
I'm so sorry, everyone. My phone overheated, so my hotspot failed. Speaking of technology concerns. No, I was just going to say that I think there are two things. In my ideal scenario, as Niko was saying, there's co-construction of the problem statement that takes place with people on the ground. So that's the first thing is, just bringing teachers in at the end of the process or the end of the research to say, here's what that means for you, is unlikely to get the effects we want just because the whole process isn't as consultative and it isn't as engaging, to be quite frank. People like to be involved. They like co-creation, they like co-design. And we tend to resist a little bit the more authoritarian top-down type of approach. And then the last thing I was going to say was that if we want to model, if we do that consultation process and we create products that are really meaningful, make deep change, make real change in the lives of the people that we're hoping to benefit, and then we want to scale to other contexts, one of the things that is very helpful is if those products are based on the science of learning and actual learning processes more so than the context in which they are developed, because that's the crucial thing that we as humans have in common, right? Learning is in part a biological process that we all engage all of the time. We all have. Yes, there's individual variation, but that's the core commonality across all humanity that we can draw from if we design correctly. And that will help us in our quest to make a real difference in the lives of the less fortunate. Thank you so much.
That's such a great point to end today's discussion. Thank you very much, Kelly, and many, many thanks for all the points you made, our panelists today. I think there are many take-home messages here. We learned a lot through this conversation, and we'll be learning more as we are continuing the dialogue with both practitioners, researchers, and designers in this space. So please stay part of the community. Follow the center's work, but follow very much the work also of Niko, John, Janika, and Kelly. It was shared with the invite, but it will be also shared in social media, and other follow-up links will be putting out. So on behalf of the center, many, many thanks. And well, I wish you nice Christmas and Happy New Year, because I won't see you before then. And we'll reconnect then again with another webinar in January. So thank you all, and
Thank
goodbye.
you, Natalia. Thank you. This was
Thanks.
a pleasure to be here with everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.